So, picture this. It's the early 2000s, right? And you're just scrolling through internet classifieds, probably looking for a used couch or something. And then you hit this ad, and your brain just does this screeching halt. It's advertising for a person between 18 and 30 who was willing to be slaughtered and consumed. I mean, most of us would just slam the laptop shut, maybe bleach our eyes, and try to forget we ever saw it. But here's the kicker, the thing that'll actually keep you up tonight. Someone actually responded to that ad. And what happened next? Well, it became one of the most messed up, consensual crimes ever put on record. And get this, that's just the first story I'm about to tell you. We're not talking about ancient history here, no urban legends. These are 5 real people. People who had email addresses, knew what flip phones were, maybe even shopped at the same grocery store you do. They did things that are just unspeakable. The absolute scariest part? They all look completely ordinary, just like anyone you might pass on the street. Imagine this quaint, half-timbered farmhouse deep in the German countryside. Looks like it's straight off a postcard, right? Except inside, a 41-year-old computer technician named Armin Meiwes was nurturing a fantasy so incredibly dark, it seriously made us rethink what humans are even capable of. Armin, he had a rough start. His dad bounced when he was 8. Brothers split as soon as they could. His mom, she was in the house, but she was controlling, no warmth. And that abandonment, it just twisted something inside him. He developed this desperate need, a fantasy of literally absorbing another person, making it absolutely impossible for them to ever leave him. And then, the internet came along. And suddenly, those fantasies weren't met with immediate horror, but with a strange kind of fascination. He'd hang out in chat rooms, places like Cannibal Cafe. He went by Frankie. Most people there, they were just role-playing, chasing a taboo thrill. Armin wasn't playing. So, when he put up that notorious listing, wanted, a young male, athletically built, who agrees to be killed and eaten, the responses actually poured in. Most people, of course, totally freaked out when the conversation got practical. But then, a 43-year-old engineer from Berlin, a guy named Bernd Brandes, he wrote back. Turns out, Bernd had been searching for someone to fulfill his own lifelong fantasy, self-annihilation through cannibalism. What followed? Weeks of planning. They talked about pain management, which body parts would be eaten fresh, which would be frozen. Their messages, honestly, they read less like some twisted predator-prey thing, and more like, 2 project managers trying to coordinate a really complex deliverable. On the big day, Bernd shows up off the train, carrying just this small overnight bag. Inside, cold medicine and alcohol, stuff to dull the agony he expected. And Armin, he met him like an old friend. The actual video footage of what happened next, it's never going to be seen publicly, thank God. But the investigators, they'll never forget it. Bernd, completely voluntarily, took sleeping pills, chugged half a bottle of schnapps, and then asked Armin to sever his penis so they could share it as a meal. When the first knife stroke was a bit clumsy, Bernd actually laughed through the pain. He whispered that it was worse than he'd imagined, but he wanted to continue. Hours later, Bernd was dying in a bathtub, and Armin was just sitting beside him, reading a Star Trek novel. Every now and then, he'd ask if his guests still wanted to die, and each time, Bernd said yes. Over the next 10 months, Armin painstakingly ate something like 20 kilos of human flesh. He described the taste as pork, but stronger. Every single bite, he claimed, eased his loneliness. Bernd was inside him now, impossible to abandon.
Wie war der erste Bissen, den Sie gegessen haben? Wie hat das geschmeckt? Wie war das?
Gut, der erste Bissen war zunächst ein sehr komisches und undefinierbares Gefühl, weil ich hatte mir das ja nun auch über 40 Jahre lang oder 30 Jahre lang praktisch herbeigesehnt und gewünscht. Und war also nun auch der Meinung, dass diese innere Verbindung dann jetzt durch dieses Fleisch perfekt wird. Und das Fleisch schmeckt ähnlich wie Schweinefleisch, etwas herber, kräftiger. Aber ansonsten, wenn jemand anders davon gegessen hätte, er hätte keinen Unterschied gemerkt. Also es schmeckt recht gut.
And this is the really chilling part. Armin lived a totally normal life for nearly a year, kept his job, mowed his lawn, waved to his neighbors. Nobody suspected he'd turned his kitchen into a butcher shop. He only got caught when he went online looking for a second volunteer. And that time, someone called the police. When officers raided that farmhouse, they found a human skull hidden behind a false wall, ribs wrapped up in shrink wrap, and that home video documenting everything. Armin confessed with this bizarre, polite openness. He even offered to cook dinner for the detectives to show them his technique. The German legal system faced this absolute nightmare dilemma. If a victim explicitly consents to their own killing, is it murder? Or is it assisted suicide, just taken to this horrific extreme? After 2 trials and massive public outrage, Armin finally got life imprisonment. From his cell, he now says he's a vegetarian, as if abstaining from meat can somehow, just wipe away what he did. But the true horror here isn't the gore. It's how incredibly mundane it all seems. A neat kitchen, a friendly computer tech, a consenting adult who literally signed his life away before hopping on a regional train to oblivion. Okay, you probably think you know Jeffrey Dahmer's story. The headlines, the court sketches, the Netflix series. But if you strip away all that sensationalism, what you're left with is something genuinely more terrifying than any monster movie. Just this soft-spoken, polite man who seemed utterly normal. And that's exactly what makes Dahmer's story so chilling. Evil didn't show up with fangs and claws. It wore a quiet smile and just asked if you wanted to see some photographs. Jeffrey, he was obsessed with dead animals from childhood, apparently. He'd collect roadkill, dissect it behind the house. His parents? They just figured, oh, it's morbid curiosity. It wasn't. It was rehearsal. He struggled with his sexuality, totally in silence, just felt isolated and ashamed. But even more than that, he couldn't connect with people. He could only fantasize about them. Fantasies where his partners never left, never rejected him. Fantasies where they were completely under his control. His first murder happened when he was just 18. Stephen Hicks, a hitchhiker. Jeffrey brought him home, gave him a beer, and when Stephen tried to leave, Jeffrey panicked. He couldn't be alone again. So, he bludgeoned him with a dumbbell, dismembered the body, and scattered the remains through the woods.
In 1991, police converged on a Bath Township home and for a week dug for answers in a 13-year-old mystery. They found the scattered bones of Stephen Hicks, the first murder victim of serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer.
We just have found a bone from the clavicle. We also found a rib.
The victim killed in a bedroom, his body dismembered in a tight crawl space.
He'd later say he didn't even know why he did it. But after that first kill, the urge didn't just vanish. It just went underground. For almost a decade, Dahmer actually suppressed his compulsions. He joined the army, got discharged for drinking, bounced between jobs. Then, in the late 1980s, he started killing again. And this time, there was just no stopping him. His method was disturbingly simple. Lure young men, mostly gay men of color, back to his Milwaukee apartment. Promises of money, photo shoots, slip sleeping pills into their drinks, and then silence them forever. But Jeffrey wasn't just killing. He was trying to create something. He actually told investigators, "I was trying to create living zombies, people who would do whatever I wanted." Just think about that for a second. He wasn't killing for pleasure. Not really. He was killing to prevent abandonment. In his totally twisted logic, death was the only way to make someone stay. He drilled holes into his victims' skulls while they were still alive and poured acid into their brains. He kept trophies, skulls, hands, even full skeletons. His freezer wasn't full of food. It was full of people, and he almost got away with it. In one absolutely infamous incident, a 14-year-old boy named Konorak Synthesomphone actually escaped Jeffrey's apartment. Naked, drugged, bleeding. Neighbors called the police, and Jeffrey convinced the officers it was just a lover's quarrel. They gave the boy back to him. Konorak was dead within the hour. Jeffrey's killing spree finally ended when a guy named Tracy Edwards fought back. Tracy stayed calm, waited for his moment, and escaped with a handcuff still dangling from his wrist. When police finally got into Jeffrey's apartment, they found Polaroids documenting dismembered bodies in various stages of decay. Then, they opened the refrigerator. Jeffrey was arrested that night, and in his confession, he spoke so calmly, almost politely, about everything he'd done. Police were just stunned by how ordinary he seemed. No ranting, no crying, just explaining. 17 young men, 17 sons, brothers, lovers who just never came home. In 1994, Jeffrey himself was beaten to death in prison by another inmate who apparently claimed he was carrying out God's justice. Dahmer was just 34 years old. The whole story still haunts us because Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't some monster hiding in the shadows. He was your neighbor, your co-worker, just that guy who seemed harmless enough to accept a drink from. So, in this village in Purbalingga, Indonesia, they just called him Suman. He was just a mischievous kid, failed a few grades, helped his family tend goats, studied religion at the mosque. Nothing unusual, nothing that screamed dangerous, until the black magic found him. When Sumanto's family lost absolutely everything in Indonesia's economic collapse, he just kind of drifted off to the sugarcane plantations of Lampung. 2 failed marriages, some violence, a lot of drinking. He was clearly searching for something, power, spiritual power. And that's where he met Taslim, another laborer who introduced him to Ilmu Hitam, black magic. Now, the belief he was taught was ancient and horrifying. Eat human flesh, especially from someone recently deceased, and you absorb their soul. They told him if he ate 7 people, he'd gain power. 21, control spirits. 41, you cannot be killed. For a man who had lost absolutely everything, this must have sounded like salvation. Sumanto went back to his village a completely different person. Built a shack right next to his father's hut. Chased away children. Cursed at neighbors. He even warned his family that one day he would eat them. They just thought he was totally crazy. Then, 81-year-old Mba Rina died. The mosque drum announced her passing. She was buried that afternoon. By nightfall, Sumanto had made his decision. He rode his bicycle to the cemetery, dug up her grave, and actually pulled her body from the earth. Under the moonlight, he bit her toes, shoved her into a plastic sack, and then pedaled home with her corpse strapped to his back. In his shack, he laid the body on the ground and sharpened his knife. First, he took her genitals, apparently believed to hold the strongest spiritual energy. Then he skinned her shins, cut into her thighs, and just began to feast. He ate a plate and a half of raw meat before cooking the rest. Boiled it, roasted it, fried it, even skewered it like satay. And get this, he gave some to his father, claiming it was goat. His father ate it, liked it, even asked for more. The smell, that's what gave him away. 3 days later, police found human bones buried under his bed, flesh stored like leftovers, and a body part literally turned into a pillow. When they arrested him, Sumanto didn't deny a thing. He explained it all, like someone just describing a normal religious ritual, not a crime. He genuinely believed that eating the dead would make him spiritually powerful, that their souls now lived inside him, that he had somehow become more than human. Now, under Indonesian law, there was no specific statute for cannibalism. So, he was charged with grave robbery and sentenced to 5 years. He only served 3. But when he was released, the world hadn't forgotten. His family rejected him. Villagers chased him out. His name became this punchline, a meme, a symbol of the grotesque. In later interviews, Sumanto actually admitted human meat wasn't even tasty, said it smelled awful. The fat was just overwhelming. But after eating it, he felt peaceful, not satisfied, not full, just peaceful. And that, to me, might be the most terrifying part of all. There's something about killers who work alone that we can almost, logically wrap our heads around. Passion, rage, mental illness. But when they collaborate, when they turn murder into a family business, that's when it becomes truly nightmarish. So, in the crumbling city of Novokuznetsk, Siberia, a history teacher named Lyudmila lived with her adult son Alexander in this tiny one-bedroom apartment. The windows were always covered with black sheets, and the smell in the hallway, it was just unbearable. Rotting meat, this foul stench that made neighbors literally hold their breath when they passed. But this was post-Soviet Russia, right after the collapse. People were too scared, too poor, too desperate to ask questions. They just minded their own business. They had no idea they were living next door to a slaughterhouse. Alexander, the son, he'd been diagnosed with schizophrenia, spent time in psychiatric hospitals. His mother, Lyudmila, she was apparently obsessed with serial killers, just fascinated by the grotesque parts of human history. And as Russia just crumbled around them, they apparently found their calling. Street children, thousands of them. Abandoned kids, just surviving on scraps, sleeping in train stations. Nobody looked for them. Nobody protected them. They were perfect prey. Lyudmila, the mother, she would actually lure them in with offers of food or shelter. Once they were inside the apartment, the door would lock, and they just never came back out. Alexander would beat them, torture them, murder the children. Then he'd dismember them right there in the bathtub, cook parts of their bodies, eat them, not for survival. Investigators said it was clear he enjoyed it. This was all about power. Some children were actually kept alive for days. Some were even forced to watch others die. And Lyudmila, the mother, she'd help clean up, boil body parts, dispose of the remains in the river. They finally got caught in 1996 when plumbing workers found human bones in the pipes. The trail, of course, led right back to their apartment. And there, police discovered a partially decomposed body in the bathtub and human meat in pots on the stove. Alexander had actually fled, but they tracked him to a hospital where he'd checked in for an infected leg wound. When they arrested him, he showed absolutely no remorse. He just told police that street children were human garbage and he was just cleaning up the streets. Police believe he killed at least 19 people, possibly as many as 80. His mother got 13 years as an accomplice. Alexander was sentenced to life in a psychiatric facility where he remains, sedated, restrained, under constant watch. What makes this case so terrifying isn't just the body count or the absolute brutality. It's the collaboration. A mother who should have stopped her son instead fed his violence. An apartment that became a literal slaughterhouse. A society that just looked the other way. And children who vanished without anyone even noticing. Some crimes, they just echo through history, not because of how many people were involved, but because of how deeply they just scar the human soul. Albert Fish's story is the kind that makes you double-check if your doors are locked. Makes you want to hug your kids just a little tighter. Born in 1870, Fish figured out early on that pain excited him. While other kids cried during beatings at the orphanage, he'd just smile. He'd whip himself with belts, stick needles into his skin, his thighs, his abdomen, even his groin. X-rays later showed more than 24 needles still buried in his body. He called them pleasures. As an adult, Fish actually blended in perfectly, worked as a painter, got married, had 6 children. To his neighbors, he was just that weird old man with the soft voice and odd manners. But behind that grandfatherly facade, he was just spiraling into pure darkness. Fish became obsessed with cannibalism, convinced that eating a child's flesh could either save his soul or theirs. He started targeting vulnerable children in poor neighborhoods, luring them with promises of candy, toys, jobs. His crimes were calculated but utterly bizarre. He'd tie children to trees and mutilate them while reciting Bible verses. To him, pain was sacred. Death was beautiful. But no case haunted the world like Grace Budd. In 1928, Fish answered a newspaper ad from a young man looking for work. Pretending to be this wealthy farmer named Frank Howard, he totally charmed the Budd family with polite words and false promises. But it wasn't the son he wanted. It was 10-year-old Grace. He came back dressed in a suit, told the parents he wanted to take Grace to a birthday party for his niece. The Budds, trusting this seemingly kind old man, they agreed. Grace never came back. For 6 long years, her fate was a complete mystery, until Fish sent a letter to her mother. This rambling, horrifying confession describing in graphic detail how he had strangled Grace and then eaten parts of her body over 9 days. That letter, that's what led the police right to him. And when they found Fish, he didn't run. He didn't deny anything. He just smiled. In court, he claimed he was a prophet, chosen to cleanse sins through blood. The jury, obviously, didn't buy the insanity defense. He was sentenced to death. On the night of his execution, Fish was calm, almost excited. As they led him to the electric chair, he reportedly said, "It will be the supreme thrill, the only one I haven't tried." What made Albert Fish so disturbing wasn't just the murders or the cannibalism. It was just how incredibly ordinary he looked while carrying this absolute monster inside. He was the man you might wave to on the street, the man your child might innocently trust, the real-life boogeyman hiding behind a grandfather's smile. So, 5 individuals from 5 totally different worlds, and yet somehow they all managed to cross the same unthinkable line. Their motivations were wildly different, right? Armin wanted a willing partner in his fantasy. Jeffrey? He just wanted to prevent abandonment. Sumanto craved spiritual power. Alexander felt like he was purging society. Fish genuinely believed God demanded it. But honestly, here's what chills me the most: how utterly ordinary they all looked. I mean, they paid rent, they walked through grocery stores, they made phone calls. Some even smiled for photographs. And in every single case, someone could have stopped them sooner. This isn't really just about cannibalism when you get down to it. This is about how easy it is to miss the warning signs, how fragile the systems are that are supposed to keep society safe, how the most dangerous predators often look the most harmless. You might never meet someone who wants to consume human flesh, but odds are you've already met someone who's quietly unraveling. And that's what makes these stories truly terrifying. Not the gore, not the headlines, but the silence. The fact that they walked among us, looked just like us, until they didn't.